Ladies and gentlemen, buckle up for another wild ride through the economic jungle, where the Trump administration's latest brainchild, the so-called Restoring America's Maritime Dominance plan, is steering us straight into a storm of self-inflicted chaos. This is Boss Economics World, where we slice through the government's economic blunders with a machete of truth, and today, we're diving into the murky waters of Trump's maritime policy, a plan that's less about dominance and more about drowning the U.S. economy in a sea of bad ideas. Let's unpack this shipwreck, from the nuts and bolts to the gaping holes, and show you why this policy is a masterclass in economic mismanagement. Picture this: the Kaimana Gila, America's pride and joy, built in Philly in 2019, can haul a respectable 3,220 containers. Not bad, right? Now, hold your breath. China's Yangtze shipbuilding churns out behemoths that carry 24,346 containers. That's not a ship, that's a floating city. Yet, the Trump administration thinks it can close this gap by slapping hefty fees on Chinese-built or owned ships starting October 14, 2025, and jacking up tariffs on Chinese-made containers, cranes, and chassis. The pitch? Protect U.S. jobs, revive shipyards, and stick it to China's maritime dominance. Sounds patriotic, but it's economic lunacy. Let's start with the core flaw: these tariffs and fees are like trying to fix a sinking ship with a band-aid. The U.S. builds less than 1% of the world's commercial ships, 0.2% to be precise, while China pumps out 74%. 0% of U.S. containers and ship-to-shore cranes are made domestically, compared to China's 96% and 80%, respectively. This isn't just a gap, it's a Grand Canyon. And the idea that taxing Chinese ships will magically resurrect U.S. shipbuilding is like believing a rain dance will end a drought. The real culprit? Decades of U.S. government policies that coddled shipbuilders, shielded them from competition, and left them as uncompetitive as a horse-drawn carriage in a Formula One race. Enter the Jones Act of 1920, the granddaddy of bad economic ideas. This relic requires cargo moving between U.S. ports to use U.S.-built, U.S.-owned ships. Sounds like a jobs program, but it's a straitjacket. By guaranteeing shipbuilders a captive domestic market, it's killed any incentive to innovate or cut costs. U.S. shipyards build ships at 5 times the cost of Asian yards, $150 million for a container ship here versus $30 million in China or South Korea. No wonder U.S. exports of passenger and cargo ships in 2024 were a measly $43 million. Meanwhile, foreign shipyards crank out 6 or 7 identical vessels at a time, slashing costs through economies of scale, while U.S. yards limp along, building maybe 5 ships a year. This inward-looking policy has turned U.S. shipbuilding into a museum piece. A 2002 study by the Center for Naval Analysis found U.S. shipbuilders use many more hours than foreign competitors, and nothing suggests improvement since. Why? Because the Jones Act lets them charge premium prices for domestic routes without worrying about pesky things like efficiency or global competition. It's like paying $500 for a hamburger because it's made in the USA. The result? An industry that's not just uncompetitive, it's practically comatose. Now, let's talk about Trump's tariff tantrum. Starting next month, Chinese-built ships could face fees up to $1.5 million per U.S. port call, with some estimates suggesting fees as high as $8.4 million for larger vessels. Non-Chinese carriers aren't safe either. 19% of ships arriving at U.S. ports in February 2025 were Chinese-built, and 98% of liner vessels could soon be hit. The administration claims this will fund a maritime action plan to rebuild U.S. shipyards, but here's the rub: these fees will jack up shipping costs, hammering exporters and importers alike. Take farmers, for example. The Agriculture Transportation Coalition warns that higher freight rates will crush U.S. agricultural exports, already reeling from China's retaliatory tariffs. A study by Trade Partnership Worldwide predicts these fees could slash U.S. exports by 12% and shave 0.25% off GDP. That's not growth, that's a self-inflicted recession. And who pays the price? American consumers, facing higher costs for everything from soybeans to sneakers. The American Apparel and Footwear Association estimates these fees will trigger product shortages and price hikes, hitting families already squeezed by inflation. In an economy where inflation hit 3.2% in Q1 2025, this is like pouring gasoline on a fire. But wait, it gets worse. Trump's 50% tariff on steel imports, implemented in March 2025, means U.S. shipbuilders pay over twice the global average for steel, which accounts for 60% of a container ship's cost. Want to build a competitive ship? Good luck when your raw materials cost more than a penthouse in Manhattan. These tariffs don't just kneecap shipbuilders, they cripple manufacturers of containers, cranes, and chassis, too. The irony? Trump's America First steel policy makes it impossible for U.S. shipyards to compete globally, ensuring they stay dependent on the tiny, protected domestic market. The administration waves the national security flag, claiming Chinese dominance threatens U.S. supply chains. Sure, China's military-civil fusion strategy is concerning. Its shipyards build both commercial and naval vessels, fueling a navy projected to hit 425 ships by 2030, compared to the US's 295. But taxing Chinese ships doesn't fix this. US yards are so bogged down with navy orders that they won't take commercial contracts until 2027. And the skilled workforce? Shrinking faster than a politician's promises. The US faces a severe labor shortage in shipbuilding, with welders and pipefitters in short supply. The Maritime Action Plan, due in 210 days, promises a maritime security trust fund and maritime prosperity zones to spur investment. Sounds fancy, but without addressing steel tariffs, labor shortages, and the Jones Act's chokehold, it's just hot air. Even with subsidies, US yards can't match China's output, 1,700 ships a year versus America's 5. And the plan to incentivize allied shipbuilders to invest in US yards? Good luck convincing South Korea or Japan to build here when they're already outpacing us at a fraction of the cost. Here's the kicker, the US doesn't need to build every ship to secure its interests. Global trade thrives on competition among suppliers. Japan, South Korea, and Europe build reliable ships at lower costs. Instead of tariffs that punish US exporters and consumers, why not partner with allies? The SHIPS Act, backed by bipartisan senators like Mark Kelly and Todd Young, proposes subsidies and tax credits to build 250 US-made vessels for a strategic commercial fleet. But without scrapping protectionist policies like the Jones Act and steel tariffs, it's a pipe dream. The government could also reform ship financing. Countries like China and South Korea offer low-cost loans and guarantees, making their ships cheaper. The US Title XI loan program is underfunded and outdated, leaving buyers to shoulder massive risks. A 2024 report from the Cato Institute noted that past U.S. attempts at shipbuilding subsidies, like the post-World War I Emergency Fleet Corporation, burned billions with little lasting impact. If Congress wants to compete, it needs to match global financing models and push U.S. yards to innovate, not hide behind tariffs. Let's zoom out. Trump's maritime policy is part of a broader trade war, with 145% tariffs on Chinese goods and 25% on foreign cars. These aren't surgical strikes, they're economic carpet bombs. The World Bank warned in June 2025 that escalating trade tensions could shave 1.5% off global GDP by 2027, with the US hit hardest. American exporters, from farmers to manufacturers, face retaliatory tariffs from China, which imported $150 billion in US goods in 2024. Meanwhile, higher shipping costs and supply chain disruptions will drive inflation, with the Consumer Price Index projected to rise 0.8% by Q1 2026 if these fees stick. The irony? Trump's plan to bring back jobs could cost them. The American Soybean Association estimates 10,000 jobs lost in agriculture alone due to reduced exports. Ports like Long Beach and Los Angeles, handling 40% of U.S. container traffic, could see business plummet as carriers reroute to Canada or Mexico to dodge fees. This isn't dominance, it's economic self-sabotage. Folks, this is classic government overreach, throwing tariffs at a problem caused by decades of bad policy. The Jones Act, steel tariffs, and a refusal to compete globally have gutted U.S. shipbuilding, not China's subsidies. Trump's plan will raise costs, kill exports, and fuel inflation, all while failing to revive an industry that's been on life support since Reagan. Want to fix it? Ditch the protectionism, invest in innovation, and partner with allies. Otherwise, we're sailing straight into a recession, and the only thing dominant will be the economic pain. This is Boss Economics World, where we call out the government's economic faceplants. Drop your thoughts below. Are tariffs the answer, or is this another policy shipwreck? Subscribe for more truth bombs, and let's keep the economy real.